Hello there, everyone. Hola a todos, and welcome to the Spanish GCSE and iGCSE video tutorial. In this particular tutorial, we are going to look at if clauses or C clauses, constructions which can be very useful at GCSE and iGCSE level to particularly impress examiners. So I'm going to take you through the different types of if clauses, how to use each one, and how to use them to boost your grades. So, my name is Dhananjay Talwar, first of all, and I studied French and Italian for my MA at the University of Cambridge, graduating back in 2015. I've been in the field of education since that time, mostly as a full time tutor. I'm really passionate about languages and language learning myself, having learned more than 20 languages to different levels, which include at least 9 to fluency, of which Spanish is obviously one. It's something I love to do and is always likely to be a hobby and passion of mine. And likewise, I'm passionate about helping students to reach their goals and giving them the tools to succeed in language learning and to enjoy the process a lot as well. And I've been lucky enough to help over 500 students so far achieve or even exceed their target grade in GCSE or iGCSE exams for different languages as a full-time tutor. I've taught 8 languages to GCSE or iGCSE level thus far, and several at higher levels as well. So these are the Spanish GCSE and iGCSE exam boards. As of August 2025, there are 4 of them for GCSE Spanish and 2 for iGCSE Spanish. I do recommend being aware of the differences between your exam board and others, and try and tailor your preparation to your exam board so that you know how it's going to be like for you on the actual day of the exams, because there are slight differences from exam board to exam board. In this particular video, though, we're exploring Spanish grammar, part of the Spanish language overall, and therefore the material in this video on if clauses is relevant for students of any exam board. So, if clauses, or C clauses, to use the Spanish word for if instead. There are 3 different kinds of if clauses or C clauses in Spanish. Each of them has, as we'll see, a different sequence of tenses, and they can be used to good effect to show off, particularly, say, in your longer writing task as part of the writing paper, and potentially towards the end of your speaking exam as well, such as in topic-based conversations. There are 3 different kinds. We're going to look at each of them in turn, one by one, and they get progressively harder as we go along, and quite considerably so as well. So the first type is the easiest, second type definitely somewhere in the middle, and the third type is very challenging for students to use. They can definitely be used to impress examiners. So if you're able to use these C clauses, don't refrain from doing so, but it is very important that you're able to use it correctly and that you're confident in using them correctly. And if you're not sure, if you're not feeling confident in being able to pull them off correctly, then I would avoid using them at all, because you wouldn't get credit for it. You wouldn't score marks if there are mistakes there. And of course, the more complex the clause you use, the more impressive it is to the examiners, as long as you manage to use it correctly, of course. C clauses or if clauses can be used when answering a lot of different speaking questions and in both of your writing tasks potentially, but especially the longer writing task, where you do need to vary your language more. Okay, we're going to kick off, of course, with type 1. This is the first kind of if clause or C clause, and it is the simplest as well. So if this feels difficult, it may feel difficult, but bear in mind that the ones that come afterwards are certainly harder. So this consists of C and then the present tense, and then followed by the future tense. For example, we have an example here as for each of the clauses. Si repasas bien, aprobarás tu examen, which means if you revise well, you will pass your exam. So you have si followed by a verb in the present tense, the present indicative tense, and then a verb in the future indicative tense. You can find the order of the tenses slightly switched around. So you can find the future tense coming first, and then si, and then the present tense. But it will always be the present tense just after the si. So repasas, just to reiterate, is the present tense of the verb repasar, meaning to revise in Spanish. Aprobarás, that verb is in the future tense in the example. Aprobar is the Spanish verb to pass, as in to pass an exam. This particular type of if clause or see clause, which is the easiest one of the three, is used for events that are realistic or quite likely to happen. So if you're saying this, if you're saying si repasas bien, aprobarás tu examen to somebody, that means that you think that there is some decent chance that they can actually pass their exam. You would not say this to somebody if it's a completely hypothetical situation, say they've already failed, for instance, or if you really do not think that there is a genuine chance of them passing their exam. Okay, that is the first kind of if clause or see clause. And now it does start to get a bit more complicated. So the second type of if clause or see clause consists of see and then the imperfect subjunctive tense and then the conditional tense. The imperfect subjunctive tense, that is, of course, a tense taken from the subjunctive mood. I have a whole other video on the subjunctive, what it is, how to use it, how to form it, and so on. So I recommend checking that one out as well. The imperfect subjunctive is one of the main subjunctive tenses, and it is used specifically in this kind of if clause or see clause as well. This type of if clause or see clause is used when talking about events that are unlikely to happen or certainly not currently true. So situations that are hypothetical or imagined in nature. And that is a key difference between type 2 C clauses and type 1 C clauses. So an example of a type 2 C clause is si repasaras o si repasases bien, aprobarías tu examen, meaning if you revised well, you would pass your exam. And yeah, just to reinforce this, repasaras or repasases, either of those would be correct forms of the imperfect subjunctive of the verb repasar, meaning to revise. There's two alternative endings for the imperfect subjunctive, so either of those would be correct, and they would mean the same thing, repasaras and repasases. And the second verb, aprobarías, that is in the conditional tense. That's the conditional form of the verb aprobar. So you can see that the sequence of tenses has changed. This is definitely quite a bit harder than the first type of see clause or if clause, because many students will not learn the imperfect subjunctive tense at all or go on to the subjunctive mood at school ahead of their GCSE and iGCSE Spanish exams. If you do, though, if you do feel able to memorize this, even if it's just set phrases which contain this kind of a see clause, so rote learning, in other words, rather than knowing how to form them, specifically, that can still very, very much impress examiners. So if you're confident in being able to use it correctly, then by all means do have a go. If you're not sure, then I would refrain from using it. And many students will focus just on the first type of if clause or see clause. A few or some will go on to the second type as well and try and use that. The third type, which we'll see shortly, is even harder, and very, very few students would attempt that at GCSE or iGCSE level at all. So don't feel that you have to try and memorize and use every single one of them, but they are still useful, and you can come across them in reading and listening passages in those exams as well. Okay, so this particular C clause number 2 is used for events that are unlikely to happen or not currently true. Yeah, if you're saying this to somebody, if you revised well, you would pass your exam. That means that you think it's unlikely that they're actually going to pass their exam. And that's the instance when you'd use this kind of a C clause. You can find the order of tenses switched again. So you could find the conditional tense coming first, then C, and then the imperfect subjunctive tense. So something like aprobarías tu examen si repasaras o repasases bien. That would also make perfect sense. So the order can be switched like that as well. Okay, on to type 3 then. This is the third and final kind of if clause or see clause. And this is definitely the most challenging. As mentioned, most students are actually not going to memorize or try and use this kind of see clause at all. You're actually unlikely to come across this in reading or listening either, because it is certainly more advanced. although I believe you could come across either of the first two types of if or C clauses in in your reading or listening exams, particularly nearer the end of the exams. So this type of if clause or C clause type 3 consists of C plus the pluperfect subjunctive tense and the conditional perfect tense. Those two tenses, the pluperfect subjunctive and the conditional perfect, those are ones that many students, most students, will not learn at all for GCSE and iGCSE Spanish papers, and they will not be familiar with or have heard of. Schools are extremely unlikely to teach these kinds of tenses, unless perhaps to the most advanced students only. So an example of this kind of C clause is si hubieras o hubieses repasado bien, habrías aprobado tu examen, which would translate as if you had revised well, you would have passed your exam. So you can see that as we go through the if clauses one by one, we're becoming more and more hypothetical or more imagined in nature. So this type 3 C clause is actually used for past hypothetical situations. So things that could have happened differently, but didn't. And that's what you're expressing here. What could have happened in the past. But if you use this kind of C clause and if you use this kind of a sentence, if you had revised well, you would have passed your exam. That indicates that the person you're speaking to would have already failed their exam. You could not say this to somebody who is yet to take their exam or somebody who could pass their exam or who has already passed their exam, for instance. That wouldn't make sense. And the first of these verbs, hubieras repasado or hubieses repasado, is in the pluperfect subjunctive tense. That is a tense in the subjunctive mood, of course, which is different to the indicative mood. And the subjunctive is the pluperfect subjunctive is formed using similar to the pluperfect tense. You use the imperfect subjunctive form of the auxiliary verb haber, followed by the past participle, which here is repasado. So that's how you form the pluperfect subjunctive. It is not an easy tense to form necessarily, and something that the vast majority of GCSE and iGCSE students would not be familiar with. The second tense here is also difficult and generally beyond the scope of GCSE and iGCSE Spanish, and that is the conditional perfect tense, which translates as would have something in English. To form that one, you would take the auxiliary verb haber again and put that in the conditional tense, and then add the past participle. Again, the past participle here is aprobado, passed or succeeded, say. So these are very difficult ones to form. And if you're struggling with this at all, you can revise it and practice it. It's likely to take considerable practice until you're able to use it. But most students will not memorize this kind of a C clause. So even though it's good to be aware of it and understand it, most students are not going to actively try and produce this in speaking or in writing at all. So you don't have to worry too much about it if it's tough. And again, this one is used for past hypothetical situations, so to express things that could have happened differently, but ultimately definitely didn't. Okay, now just a few examples to confirm and make it clear what the differences between each of those different if clauses are. So an example of type 1 is si vamos a España, veremos la Sagrada Familia. That's the easiest kind of if clause, and that is one that quite a few students are likely to feel confident in pulling off at GCSE level. If we go to Spain, we will see the Sagrada Familia, which I believe is a pretty famous monument in Barcelona. Type 2, an example of that one is si tuviera la elección, quisiera vivir en España. If I had the choice, I would like to live in Spain. So that is si, and then the imperfect subjunctive, then the conditional tense. Si tuviera la elección is quite a common example. A lot of students will try and memorize these as set phrases. So instead of learning how to form each of these if clauses, they may just memorize set examples, specific examples that they can then reel off in speaking or writing instead. And an example for type 3, definitely the hardest one, is si hubiéramos o hubiésemos salido antes, habríamos llegado a tiempo, meaning if we had left earlier, we would have reached on time. yeah, that is quite advanced. The third type of C clause, again, definitely beyond the scope for most Spanish GCSE and iGCSE students. Okay, now there's an opportunity to test yourself on each of these types of C clauses. So I'm going to give some sentences in English. Your task is to translate each one into Spanish. And of course, each of these are based on a particular type of if clause or C clause, as you'll see. So the first one, how do you say in Spanish, if she won the lottery, she would buy a big house? So the way I would go about this is look at each of the verbs and try and decide what kind of if clause this is. If it's number one, type two, or type three. Once you've identified that, then conjugate the verbs, put them into the correct forms, and then translate the rest of the sentence into Spanish as well. That's the way I would go about it. But the first step is, of course, knowing or identifying what kind of an if clause this one is. If she won the lottery, she would buy a big house. Okay, I'm going to give you a bit more time to think through this. It can be a bit challenging. Okay, some more seconds. Okay, here comes the answer then. So this is a type 2C clause or if clause. Yeah, it's expressing something that is quite a remote possibility, so pretty hypothetical in nature. Yeah, and given the sequence of tenses in English as well, you can identify it's a type 2 if clause. In Spanish, this would be si ganara o si ella ganara la lotería, compraría una casa grande. If she won the lottery, she would buy a big house. The first step really is knowing what kind of if clause that is. And then you would hopefully remember the sequence of tenses, si followed by the imperfect subjunctive, ganara here, and then the conditional tense, compraría. Okay, question number 2 of the test. If we leave now, we will arrive tomorrow. Again, try and think through what type of an if clause this is, type 1, type 2, or type 3, and then put the verbs in the right forms, conjugate them correctly, and then translate the rest of the sentence too. I'll give a little bit more time for this one as well. Okay, and I will show you the answer then. This one is a type 1 C clause. That is perhaps the most important thing to recognize first of all. And then you just have to recall the sequence of tenses. So C followed by the present tense and then a verb in the future tense. Yeah, si salimos ahora, llegaremos mañana would be the most common translation in Spanish of if we leave now, we will arrive tomorrow. So salimos is the present tense of the verb salir. Llegaremos is the verb llegar in the future tense. There are alternative translations for most of these as well. Number 3, if I had known, I would not have come. So try and think through what kind of an if clause that is. Is that type 1, type 2, or type 3? Then think about the sequence of tenses, put each of the verbs into the appropriate tense, and translate the rest of the sentence. It makes it sound very simple, but I know it definitely is not going to feel that easy. Okay, bit more time to have a go at this. And a little bit longer still. Okay, I'm going to show the answer for this one as well then. So this is, of course, type 3. Yeah, you could probably tell by elimination as well. Type 3 is the one type of if clause that's remaining. And yeah, you would say this in Spanish most likely as si lo hubiera o hubiese sabido, no habría venido. So the first verb, hubiera sabido or hubiese sabido, either of those forms are correct because there's two possible sets of endings for the imperfect subjunctive tense. That whole construction, though, hubiera sabido, hubiese sabido, is in the pluperfect subjunctive. Which is quite an advanced tense. And the second tense, habría venido or no habría venido, that is the conditional perfect tense. So definitely the hardest of the three kinds of if clauses, the last one. Okay, now we're going to go through a little quiz to test your understanding of if clauses in Spanish. Question 1, how many different types of if clauses are there? Probably starting off fairly nice and easy if you've been following along through the whole video, but let me give you a little bit of time to think over this as well. Okay, then let me reveal the answer for this one. There are, of course, three different types of if clauses. Yeah, and we went through each of them in some detail just a bit earlier. Question number 2 then is true or false. The easiest type of if clause is C, followed by the present tense and then future tense. Try and remember what we covered before. And in any case, I'll give you a few more seconds to think through your answer. Okay, here comes the answer for this one. This is true. This is certainly the easiest type of if clause for students to use, particularly in your writing or speaking exams. And number 3, true or false, you must use at least one if clause in your writing exam. Have a think through this one. A few more seconds. Okay, let me show you the answer. This is false, actually. There's no obligation whatsoever to use an if clause or any construction for that matter. But if you can do so correctly, of course, they can look really impressive to examiners. That's why it's worth covering them and worth going through them in some detail. There's no obligation at all, but yeah, they tend to be show-off type phrases, along with, say, verbs in the subjunctive mood and a few other, harder pieces of grammar. And number 4, which if clauses is it best to focus on for Spanish GCSE or iGCSE? Again, this may be relatively simple to answer, but I'll give you a few seconds to think. All right, and let's see the answer now. So most students will certainly learn the first type of if clause and potentially the second one as well. The third one is certainly more complex, and only the most advanced students are likely to attempt to learn it at all at this level, at GCSE or iGCSE level. So don't be too perturbed if the third if clause seems extremely difficult. That is likely to be the case. Okay, if you've got questions about anything here, or if you'd like to know more about more personalized help, which I do provide too, you can get in touch through email, via Facebook or Instagram. And I post on social media, Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn every day, sharing my love of languages with people, hopefully inspiring more and more of them to learn languages, and making sure they know why it can be so beneficial and fun at the same time. I post a lot about Spanish GCSE and iGCSE as well, and other languages for GCSE and iGCSE, giving advice on how to revise, how to maximize your grade, how to go into the exams feeling confident, and a lot more. So do give me a follow on each of those platforms. I have a lot of free resources available, including for Spanish GCSE and iGCSE, and for other languages too. And I do one-to-one classes, group classes, courses, and plenty more help. So if you'd like to know more about any of this, don't hesitate to reach out.